The meteorite had struck deep in the forest, its arrival a quiet, fiery streak across the night sky. It lodged itself into the earth, smoldering in a pit of charred soil, faintly glowing a sickly green. By dawn, the animals had found it, curious at first, their small movements hesitant and watchful. Squirrels sniffed, their fur bristling unnaturally, while deer pawed the ground, eyes wide and unblinking. A low, pervasive hum radiated from the stone, a sound felt more than heard, burrowing into their instincts and awakening something raw and primal. 3 days later, the forest had grown eerily silent. Birdsong was replaced by guttural snarls, and the rustle of leaves became the sharp crackle of pursuit. A lone hiker passing through found himself surrounded by creatures that no longer fled from him. The doe stared, her chest heaving as if suppressing a scream, then charged. When he fell, the claws of raccoons and teeth of foxes tore at his flesh. But it wasn't hunger driving them. The light in their eyes, a faint green glow, matched the meteorite's unholy aura. Miles away, a small town, nestled on the edge of the forest, remained oblivious. Its residents noticed only the absence of stray cats, the uneasy barking of dogs refusing to leave their porches. Children were told not to wander too close to the tree line, though no one could articulate why. The air felt thicker somehow, carrying with it a metallic taste that settled at the back of the throat. At night, families heard distant, unnatural howls, punctuated by something deeper, more human, calling back in rage. The first human victim from the town was a hunter named Greg. He'd ventured into the woods at dusk, his rifle slung over one shoulder. When he returned, his wife didn't recognize him. His face was pallid, his movements jerky, as though his limbs were being piloted by something outside of him. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at her without blinking, the green tint in his eyes faint but unmistakable. When she asked if he was all right, he lunged, his strength unnatural, his screams unearthly. She fled into the street, leaving the door open behind her. The contagion, if it could be called that, spread fast. Greg's neighbors found themselves overtaken one by one, some simply by proximity to him, others after venturing too close to the woods. By dawn, the infected gathered in small, twitching clusters, staring at the town square as if waiting for some silent command. They moved with purpose, yet seemed disconnected from themselves, their faces twisted into masks of rage and pain. Those who hadn't succumbed barricaded themselves inside their homes, listening to the pounding on their doors, the guttural growls outside growing louder with every hour. In one house, a woman named Elena kept her young son hidden in the attic, holding him tightly as they listened to the chaos below. She thought of the meteorite. She had read about its impact in the local paper, a trivial curiosity just days ago. Now it seemed connected to everything. She glanced out the window, spotting the faint green glow emanating from the forest's horizon, a pulse in sync with the screams in the streets. She realized the truth too late. Whatever the meteorite carried wasn't simply spreading. It was calling them. When Elena's husband returned home unexpectedly, she cried in relief, thinking for a moment that he had escaped the madness. But as he stepped closer, she saw his eyes, glimmering faintly green. He smiled, his face a mask of fury and despair, and raised a hand toward her. She grabbed her son and fled upstairs, barricading the door behind them. The pounding that followed wasn't just his fists. It was joined by dozens of others. She whispered to her son to close his eyes as the door began to splinter. As the sun rose, the town was silent again, though the air carried a new weight. Elena's house was empty, the windows shattered. The infected stood in the streets, still as statues, their eyes glowing faintly in the morning light. From the woods came the sound of rustling, not chaotic but organized. The animals emerged first, deer and wolves walking side by side, their movements synchronized. Behind them came the infected humans, their numbers swelling, their faces blank but somehow expectant, all moving toward the meteorite's distant hum. Far from the chaos, a scientist in a nearby city received a strange rock sample sent anonymously. The attached note mentioned its origin, the crash site in the forest. Intrigued, she examined it under a microscope, observing its crystalline structure and faint green hue. Dr. Evelyn Morrow had always prided herself on being a skeptic, someone immune to the sensationalism of unproven phenomena. But as she pored over the data from the meteorite sample, her logical mind wavered. The crystalline structure defied known laws of physics, its patterns shifting even under the steady gaze of the electron microscope. She ran spectroscopy tests, finding traces of an element that didn't match anything on the periodic table. Its behavior was both magnetic and organic, responding to electrical currents as though it were alive. Her hands trembled slightly as she documented her findings, the air in the lab heavy with the faint hum emanating from the sample. She worked without pause, her curiosity turning to obsession. The hum seemed to grow louder the longer she stayed near the sample, like a whisper just at the edge of her consciousness. Her assistant, Mark, returned periodically with coffee and updates, but she barely acknowledged him. Her focus was consumed by one question: what was the meteorite trying to communicate? Deep within the shifting crystalline patterns, she noticed fractal-like symbols forming and dissolving. They resembled no language she knew, but they felt intentional, like a message waiting to be deciphered. Evelyn's breakthrough came as night fell. She discovered that when the sample was exposed to ultraviolet light, the patterns stabilized briefly, aligning into something resembling a molecular sequence. Her breath quickened as she realized it wasn't random. It was a blueprint. Whether it was meant to alter, create, or destroy, she couldn't yet say. She scribbled notes furiously, her mind racing with the implications. If she could isolate the sequences, there might be a way to counteract whatever was spreading. The thought offered a flicker of hope, but it was extinguished almost immediately by the nagging sensation that she was running out of time. As she worked, she began to feel the physical toll of proximity to the meteorite. Her head throbbed, her vision blurred, and her thoughts became erratic, swinging between euphoria and crushing despair. She told herself it was exhaustion, but deep down, she knew it was the same force affecting the animals and people near the crash site. Her rational mind screamed at her to step away, to leave the lab and call for help. But something stronger kept her rooted in place. The meteorite wasn't just a sample to study anymore. It had become part of her, its hum entwined with the rhythm of her heart. Mark found her slumped over her desk hours later, the lab eerily silent except for the faint crackle of broken glass underfoot. He called her name, his voice trembling, but Evelyn didn't respond. When he stepped closer, he saw her eyes snap open, the green glow within them burning brighter than he thought possible. She stood slowly, her movements jerky, her expression vacant. Mark stepped back, pleading with her to speak, but her lips twisted into a cruel, unnatural smile. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was layered with something inhuman, a guttural tone beneath her words. "It's not meant to stop," she said. "It's meant to spread." Before he could react, she lunged, her strength far beyond anything he'd known her capable of. She pinned him to the floor, her nails digging into his skin as the hum in the room grew deafening. He struggled beneath her, shouting her name, but the Evelyn he knew was gone. As her hands tightened around his throat, he caught a final glimpse of her face, a mixture of agony and fury that mirrored the infected in the forest. Then the room exploded in a blinding green light as the meteorite pulsed one last time, shattering into countless shards that embedded themselves in every surface, and in Evelyn herself. When the authorities arrived hours later, they found the lab in ruins. Evelyn's body was slumped against a wall, her skin streaked with green veins that pulsed faintly even in death. The shards of the meteorite, scattered across the city by the blast, hummed with life, their signals syncing with the faint whispers now audible on every radio frequency. The infected emerged one by one, their movements deliberate, their eyes glowing brighter. Evelyn had come close to unraveling the meteorite's secrets, but in the end, it had unraveled her instead. Now the infection spread unchallenged, its origins buried along with the last hope of stopping it.